1200 BC. The Dark Centuries begin. The time of large armies with 100,000 soldiers. Mesopotamia. The Elam was organized federally. At the head was a chief king, who had several vassal princes. The deputy of the high king was his next younger brother. The prince of Susa was the son of the high king. If the overlord died, his son was not the successor, but rather the viceroy, and the next younger brother took his place. This means that disputes within the ruling families can hardly be avoided. The viceroy often overthrew his older brother and thus gained control. Elam reached the peak of this development of power under the Shutrusid dynasty in the 12th century BC. Shutruk-Nahunti conquered hundreds of Babylonian towns, including Babylon itself and Sippar, and imposed a massive tribute of 120 talents of gold and 480 shekels of silver on the conquered. The famous law stele of Hammurabi, the Code of Hammurabi, a huge stone engraved with mythical symbols, went to the Elamite king's collection in the capital Susa. The Kushite dynasty, which had previously lasted 576 years, was founded in 1155 BC, shattered by the conquest of Babylon by the Elamites. After the defeat, heavy tributes were imposed on the Babylonians. The famous law stele of Hammurabi, the Code of Hammurabi, went to the Elamite capital Susa. The most painful loss for the Babylonians, however, was the holy city god statue of Marduk, which was also carried off to Susa. This may have been the reason why, decades later, Nebuchadnezzar launched his campaign against the kingdom of Elam, east of Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar I was a Babylonian king who reigned from 1125 to 1104 BC. BC is the fourth ruler from the so-called Second Isin dynasty. His name Nabuchodonosor translated means Nabu, protect my heir son. The duration of Nebuchadnezzar's war with Elam and the number of campaigns he fought are not known. However, the decisive campaign may have taken place in 1110 BC. Instead, a stele from the Kushite sheikh city Marduk tells in detail about the preparations and events of the battle. When the king of the gods, Marduk, commanded him to avenge the land of the Akkad, he took up his arms and made an attack all the way to the city of Dur, the cult city of En. During the entire period, the midday heat glowed like fire and the windings of the paths burned like flames. There was no water in the floodplains and the drinking water sources were cut off. The decisive battle took place on the Ulia River, which lies in southwest Iran. In this heated battle, the Babylonian kingdom was able to prevail, with the Kushite sheikh city Marduk achieving the decisive overall victory over Elam. The fate of the Elamite king Hudaludus in Susanak remained unclear. After this battle, Nebuchadnezzar plundered and devastated the kingdom of Elam and its capital Susa to such an extent that this may have been the reason why sources and reports from and about Elam were non-existent for the next 300 years. Nebuchadnezzar's greatest achievement for the Babylonians was the home of the Babylonian city god statue Marduk to the Babylonian capital Babylon, which was believed to have been in foreign possession of the Elam people for decades. This famous victory was celebrated in hymns, epic poetry, and the Marduk prophecy. Known as Nabuchodonosor and Marduk, or the Epic of Nabuchodonosor. It tells the legendary story of the creation of the statue of Marduk and is one of two hymns glorifying his military achievements. The second hymn is the hymn to Marduk, which celebrates the victory over the Elamites. Nebuchadnezzar had several temples built and expanded during his time as ruler. The construction of the temple in Babylon, which was dedicated to the weather god Adad, is recorded. There were also armed conflicts with the Assyrian Empire, located north of Babylon. End of the 12th century BC. In the 4th century BC, the Assyrian Empire under Tukulti-Ninurta I was able to expand its sphere of influence to the Persian Gulf, where he was also able to conquer Babylon. However, Nebuchadnezzar was able to regain Babylonia's independence a short time later. The city of Assur was located at a crossing of the Tigris on the trade routes between Babylonia and Anatolia, Elam, and the Zagros Mountains. Without the defensive ability of its population, Assur would have become easy prey for West Semitic invaders. Horses for equipping the chariots were obtained from the Zagros and perhaps also from the Iranian highlands. The importation of horses was subject to customs duties. It is generally believed that the Assyrians adopted chariots and horse training from the Mitanni. However, texts on horse breeding and training have also come down to us since mediocre times. Chariots and teams also serve as royal gifts. Mold was particularly valued. Donkeys were used as pack animals on military campaigns. The most important raw material for weapons and armor was bronze. Iron mail and swords have always been traded by the Hittites. Iron processing has also been documented in Assyria since 1200 BC. This is how arrowheads and staffs were made. The local princes not only secured the city against invaders, but also assumed the role previously established by the king of Ur as protectors of their merchants and trading colonies. Conscripts in the army were equipped by the state and had to return the weapons after their term of service was over. The issue of the weapons was acknowledged in writing. In one text, the issue of a lance, omu, to a conscientious Iliamuri is acknowledged. After the army, Urdu, returns, he is to return the lance and his tablet will be broken as a sign of the debt paid. But not every soldier came back. The Assyrian king Tukulti-Ninurta I, after victories over the Hittites and the conquest of Babylon, assumed the title King of the Whole. His victories are reported in the Tukulti-Ninurta epic, a literary work intended to justify the conquest of Babylon. A state of war existed between Tukulti-Ninurta and Tudalija of Hutti. In it, Amuru was obliged not to allow Assyrian traders into his land and not to trade with Assur. Furthermore, he had to provide the great king with soldiers and chariots if an open war broke out. Under Tukulti-Ninurta, deportations of the population from the conquered areas are mentioned for the first time, a practice that reached enormous proportions in the Neo-Assyrian Empire. There is evidence that iron weapons were made in Assyria under Tukulti-Ninurta. After Tukulti-Ninurta was killed by his sons in a palace revolution. Weakened by this internal unrest, the Middle Assyrian Empire lost Babylon. The Neo-Assyrian Empire was solely focused on expansion. The conquered areas were bled dry by deportations of residents and taxes until further expansion was the only option in order to maintain the living standards of the ruling class. In order to keep the increasingly distant areas under control, more and more Assyrians from the heartland had to be used as soldiers, resettled, or withdrawn to administrative tasks. The ever-decreasing productivity of the heartland in turn forced the exploitation of the conquered areas and thus further expansion. 1130 BC, King Cyrus I began a renewed policy of expansion. 1100 BC, Tukulti-Ninurta I was able to expand the Assyrian sphere of influence enormously. In the south, the rulers of the Kushite dynasty were weak, making it possible to take the city again. In the north, the Hittite Empire had fallen, allowing Tukulti-Ninurta to advance into new areas and expand the Assyrian Empire to the Taurus Mountains and the coast of the Mediterranean. The deportation of 370,000 people is expected during the reign of Tukulti-Ninurta alone. This meant that rebellious states were not only defeated, but destroyed. The deported individuals found themselves in a foreign environment, dependent on Assyrian rations, without contact with their former compatriots, and had no choice but to accept Assyrian rule and integrate into the empire. This policy led to a mixing of the population and also linguistic standardization. Tukulti-Ninurta crushed repeated uprisings. The fate of the rebels was described in great detail to intimidate imitators. His successors could not hold this great empire together. The Arameans conquered large parts of northern Syria. In 900 BC, the Assyrians were pushed back to their core area in northern Mesopotamia. In the mountainous region north of the Euphrates plain, the kingdom of Urartu had developed from several small principalities and was intended to offer increasing resistance to the emerging Neo-Assyrian Empire. The kingdom of Urartu in particular caused enormous problems for the kings. Its mountainous landscape made it difficult to conquer and posed an enormous threat to the core Assyrian Empire. By the middle of the 8th century BC, the Neo-Assyrian Empire had reached a new low point. Nevertheless, the Assyrian Empire pushed the border further southwest towards Syria and Israel. The next Assyrian king Shalmaneser pushed the border of the Assyrian Empire further towards southern Syria and Israel and was able to defeat the Anatolian Luwian Hittites and the Semitic Arameans. In view of the impending danger, several principalities joined together to form an alliance, which included, among others, the northern kingdom of Israel and the king of Damascus. The anti-Assyrian alliance was in the Battle of Qarqar in 853 BC. This coalition of otherwise rival rulers stopped the Assyrian advance. The Assyrian king Shalmaneser III had left Nineveh on his 6th campaign with an army of 100,000 men, crossed the Tigris and the Euphrates, and received tribute from numerous cities, including Aleppo. He was then attacked by the troops of the king of Hamath, whom he defeated. He then plundered numerous palaces and cities in the kingdom of Hamath. After Shalmaneser had captured and plundered Qarqar, he encountered the coalition forces on the Orontes, involved in the anti-Assyrian alliance. King Adad-Idri, also known as Hadadezer of Aram Damascus, with 1,200 chariots, 1,200 cavalry, and 20,000 foot soldiers. King Urahelina of Hamath, with 700 chariots, 700 horsemen, and 10,000 foot soldiers. King Achabu of Israel with 2,000 chariots and 10,000 foot soldiers. The king of Qarqar with 10 chariots and 10,000 soldiers. King Adunubieli of Sianu with 30 chariots and 10,000 soldiers, as well as Jindabu of Arabia with 1,000 camels and numerous other small kings with around 10,000 more soldiers. The shepherd kings were able to push Assyria back, this time. The main interest of the next Assyrian chief, King Tiglath-Pileser III, was preceded by a military revolt. Still applied to access to the Mediterranean and the trading centers there. In several battles he managed to conquer the principalities of today's Syria and Lebanon, and in 733 BC to advance to Damascus, which he besieged. Damascus had never before been conquered by an Assyrian king. In a revolt in 722 BC, the son fell victim to an assassination attempt. Almost nothing is known about the origins of his successor Sargon II. In his large, magnificent inscription, Sargon reports a victory against the alliance of Babylonians and the king of Elam. He had all the temples in Babylon destroyed except that of the city god Marduk. He managed to expand his empire into Cyprus and Asia Minor and concluded a truce with the Phrygians who lived there. The king of Urartu's troops were crushed and defeated on his campaign against the Sumerians. Within 40 years, Tiglath-Pileser and Sargon, Assyria became the largest empire in the Near East. When the successor is Esarhaddon, 669 BC. When he died on a campaign against Egypt, his son and crown prince Ashurbanipal took over the government. 2 years later, this would give the Neo-Assyrian Empire its greatest expansion with the capture of Thebes, the capital of Upper Egypt. Ashurbanipal's 40-year rule was a heyday. On my second campaign, I led the way to Egypt and went as far as Thebes, the city of his strength. He saw the approach of my mighty battle, left Thebes and fled. This city was completely conquered by my hands, trusting in Assyria and Ishtar. I captured heavy, innumerable booty from Thebes. I flashed my weapons over Egypt and returned safely to Nineveh, my residence. The royal titles included, among others, King of Assyria, King of Babylon, King of Sumer and Akkad, King of the kings of Egypt and Cush, Glorious King of the land, King of the four corners, King of the universe, King of all the people. But there were also bloody battles under Ashurbanipal, including a fratricidal war with his brother, Sammusumayukin, the king of Babylonia, which permanently weakened the empire. While Sammusumayukin had been loyal in the early years, he now allied himself with the king of Elam and turned against Ashurbanipal. With an alliance with the Scythians and Medes, after a 2-year siege, Ashurbanipal conquered starving Babylonia and punished it with all severity. At that time it came to pass that the people of Akkadu, equals Babylon, who were on the side of Shamash-Sumayukin and plotted evil, were seized with famine, and they ate the flesh of their sons and daughters for their hunger, and Assur, Sin, who went before me and subjugated my adversaries, threw Samages, the enemy brother, into a burning fireplace and destroyed his life. Not a single one escaped. I let dogs, pigs, and vultures eat their butchered flesh. After the capture of Babylon, Ashurbanipal marched against Elam and captured the capital Susa. It is not known exactly when Ashurbanipal died. 616 BC. A Babylonian army under King Nabopolassar marched into Assyria. 614 BC. The city of Assyria fell. 612 BC. After a long struggle, also Nineveh, and 608 BC. Finally, the last important fortress of Qarqar. This effectively marked the end of the Assyrian Empire. The subsequent revenge of the peoples oppressed for so long by the Assyrian Empire was in no way inferior to the cruelty of its former rulers. It even exceeded it. Historians speak of the destruction of all Assyrian cities, the extermination of the inhabitants, and the devastation of the country. The end of Assyria meant the rise of Babylonia to dominance in Mesopotamia. Nabopolassar and especially his son Nebuchadnezzar II were able to build a Neo-Babylonian empire on the foundations of Assyria. Under Ramses XI, the influence of the priests of Ammonius in Thebes probably reached its peak. They are generals who legitimized their power with the title of Ammonius priest. And Pharaoh lost his divine omnipotence. The cult of Ammonius had also established itself in Nubia during the Egyptian New Kingdom and produced a powerful priesthood. Just like their counterpart in Thebes, they began writing their names in cartouches and ruled like kings. Yes, anyone who could write clearly had an advantage. The Nubian Ammonius priest Pige became ruler himself around 748 BC by marrying the daughter of the seventh king of Napata. Due to the unrest in Upper and Lower Egypt, he moved his forces north to restore Ammonius' omnipotence. Once in Thebes, he won the local priesthood to his side by getting the divine worshipper of Ammonius Shepenupet to adopt his sister as his successor. Then he celebrated the Opet festival there. Finally, he moved on and defeated the alliance of the other dynasties that submitted to him at Heracleopolis. However, they were allowed to continue to administer their old territories as governors. The Egyptian pharaoh was deposed by the Nubian Kushites. However, the success was only short-lived, because the Assyrian army under the leadership of the generals of Ashurbanipal restored the old situation in 663 BC. The goal of Assyrian policy in Egypt, the end of Kushite rule, was implemented and Thebes was sacked but not destroyed. Within 40 years, Tiglath-Pileser III and Sargon II had made Assyria the largest empire in the Near East. Sargon's successors, Sennacherib and Assur-Ahadinna, were able to maintain and even expand their territory through numerous campaigns and the suppression of uprisings. As Ashur-Ahadinna in 669 BC. When he died on a campaign against Egypt, his son and crown prince Ashurbanipal took over the government. 2 years later, this would give the Neo-Assyrian Empire its greatest expansion with the capture of Thebes, the capital of Upper Egypt. The 40-year reign of Ashurbanipal, 668 to 627 BC, was a period of prosperity. The Assyrian rule under Ashurbanipal reached its climax with the conquest and destruction of Thebes with all the Egyptian shrines located there. But after Ashurbanipal's death, the power of the Assyrians faded just as quickly as it had previously increased. Around 660 BC. In the 4th century BC, Egypt gained independence from Nubia with Assyrian help. However, the Kushite dynasty continued to rule in the south of Egypt. Tenatamen was the last ruling pharaoh in Egypt. The last pharaoh of all Egypt.
And dark times are coming. What will happen to my kingdom after my soul slips into the eternal lands of the afterlife? The flesh is weak. But the soul of a pharaoh lives on for eternity. I have always feared. Peace is a delicate balance. But when brothers turn against each other, virtues are abandoned. And bloodshed is inevitable.
Achaemenes is said to have lived around 701 BC, led the Great Migration of the Persians from the area south of Lake Urmia south through the area of the Medes and Elamites, which finally ended with the settlement at Anshan and the area around the later Persepolis. Clay tablets found in Susa show that the Persians already held fiefdoms in Elamite territory around 685 BC under the patronage of the Medes. According to Greek mythology, Achaemenes was the son of Perse and grandson of Perseus, after whom the Persians were named, and was fed by an eagle. In the 7th century BC, the Scythians invaded the areas north and east of the Black Sea and pushed out the Cimmerians. 661 BC, when Phortes was dead, and Cyaxares fought against the Lydians, when in the middle of the fight night came out of the day, and then he subdued all of Asia above the Halys, and was in the process of besieging Nineveh, when he moved against him a large Scythian army led by Medes, the son of Protothes, which pursued the Cimmerians. The Medes met these Scythians, were overcome and lost their rule to the Scythians, who then moved against Psamtik I, the Egyptian pharaoh. The rule of the Scythians brought the Medes, above all, the achievement of the Scythian style of archery on horseback. The generosity of the Scythians is said to be remarkable. After they freed the Achaemenids from the patronage of the Medes in 653 BC, the Achaemenids swore to educate Persian boys in 3 things: horse riding, archery, and truth-telling. Between 630 and 625 BC, the Scythians undertook an advance into the Near East and raids as far as Palestine. It was only under their king Nabopolassar that the Chaldeans achieved full control over Babylonia, whose throne Nabopolassar ascended to in 625 BC. This marks the beginning of what is known as the Neo-Babylonian Empire. In 612 BC, the Medes, along with the Babylonians and the Scythians, conquered Nineveh and defeated the tyrannical Assyrians. According to the Babylonian Chronicle, the Scythians conquered Egypt in 609. With the beginning of Mede rule from 612 to 605 BC, Scythian influence in the Middle East declined. The Scythians had ruled all of Asia for 28 years. In 609, Babylonian sources report that the Scythians invaded the area of Urartu, and in 608 there are reports of Scythian settlements on the upper reaches of the Tigris. The fall of Urartu in the last third of the 7th century BC is therefore also attributed to Scythia and their allies, the Mede Empire. Nabopolassar, the king of Babylon, allied himself with the Medes still living in and around Menai, who later inherited the Elamites in the east. Nabopolassar's son was married to the granddaughter of the Mede king. This alliance opened the way to Nineveh, the Assyrian capital. The Babylonian king Nabopolassar entered into an alliance with the Medes against the Assyrians, who had ruled Babylon for 200 years. The alliance defeated the Assyrians, who in turn had requested an Egyptian troop contingent under Necho II, and Nabopolassar had all remnants of the Assyrian regency destroyed in 609 BC. The subjugation of the Assyrian cities lasted until 605 BC, when Nabopolassar died, after which Nebuchadnezzar II immediately rushed to Babylon to take over the throne. During his reign, Nebuchadnezzar developed extraordinary abilities as a statesman, military leader, peacemaker, and builder. For example, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon are attributed to him. His reputation in the world at the time was so great that he was called upon to act as a peacemaker between feuding tribes. Nebuchadnezzar had the temples rebuilt in all the cities of the land. Dependents could be given to temples to serve a particular deity. However, they were not considered slaves. In addition, the large temples also had slaves who were marked with the symbol of the corresponding deity. Nebuchadnezzar built canals, the so-called Median Wall, and the processional route with the Ishtar Gate. He promoted agriculture, horticulture, and trade so that the economy quickly recovered and prospered under the new Babylonian Empire. In 594 BC, the Scythians retreated to the north. In 562 BC, Nebuchadnezzar died, leaving his son Amel-Marduk a well-ordered and consolidated empire. After just 2 years, Amel-Marduk was killed in a rebellion. Strong disputes with the priesthood ultimately led to Nabonidus seizing the throne through an uprising in 555 BC. Nabonidus was a follower of the god Sin and had thus incurred the wrath of the Marduk priesthood. And it's not good to have breakfast with the Anunnaki priest gods. Cyrus II, a descendant of Achaemenes and king of Anshan, bribed the Mede army with good old gold. According to myths, the Median king Astyages once wanted to have Cyrus killed as a child. Cyrus was not yet an independent ruler. But that was about to change. The Mede army rebelled against the Mede king Astyages and handed him over to Cyrus, who then moved into the Mede capital Agamtanu, Ecbatana, and had the city's riches transported to Anshan. In 553 BC, the Median nobility allied with the Persians. What 550 BC led to the end of Mede rule. The Mede Confederacy was subdued by Cyrus, who thus laid the foundation for the Persian Empire. The Median aristocracy enjoyed many privileges in the Achaemenid Persian Empire and were involved in the administration. King Nabonidus ascended to the throne in 556 BC. The throne of Babylon. He led those of Nebuchadnezzar II. Economic reforms that had begun and confiscated the lands from the temples of the Marduk priesthood. In addition, he installed Sin, the moon god, as the supreme deity. This led to the now hostile priesthood of Babylon colluding with the Persian king Cyrus II, who professed support for Marduk when he conquered the city in 539 BC. Cooperated and was instrumental in his overthrow and that of Babylonia. Cyrus II, or Cyrus the Great, marched his army into the open gates of Babylon and conquered the city without resistance. This also caused the collapse of the new Babylonian Empire. Now Cyrus the Great was king of Elam, the Medes, and Babylon. The founder of the Achaemenid Persian Empire was Cyrus II, but Darius I is considered to be its designer. Cyrus II was shortly after 560 BC. King of Anshan, a region in Persia under the suzerainty of the Medes after the decline of the Elamite Empire in the 7th century BC, exercised hegemony over this area for around 100 years. Cyrus II succeeded with the help of the Scythians around 550 BC to shake off this supremacy. In the years that followed, Cyrus II conquered the Mede Empire and thus created the foundations of the Persian Empire by having himself crowned king of Babylon by the Sumerian Anunnaki high priests. (500 BC). The Persian nation consists of a number of tribes. Of these, the Pasargadae are the most distinguished. They contain the Achaemenid clan, from which the Persian kings emerge. The Achaemenid Empire was founded by nomadic Persians. The Persians were an Iranian people who lived in 1000 BC, came to the area of today's Iran, and, alongside the native Elamites, settled a region that included northwestern Iran, the Zagros Mountains, and Persis. The Persians were originally nomadic pastoralists on the western Iranian plateau. The Achaemenids were originally rulers of the Elamite city of Anshan. The title King of Anshan was an adaptation of the earlier Elamite title King of Susa and Anshan. There are conflicting reports about the identity of the first kings of Anshan. According to the Cyrus Cylinder, the kings of Anshan, Tyspes, Cyrus I, Cambyses I, and Cyrus II were the ones who founded the empire. The later Behistun inscription, written by Darius the Great, claims that Tyspes was the son of Achaemenes and that Darius also descended from Tyspes via a different line, but no earlier text mentions Achaemenes. Herodotus writes that Cyrus II was the son of Cambyses I and Mandane of Media, the daughter of Astyages, king of the Medes. The Achaemenid Empire may not have been the first Iranian empire, as the Medes, another group of the Iranian people, founded a short-lived empire when they played an important role in overthrowing the Assyrians. Cyrus II rebelled in 553 BC against the Median Empire and 550 BC, managed to bribe the Mede army with gold, imprison King Astyages, and capture the Mede capital Ecbatana. According to Herodotus, this ended the 35-year reign of Astyages and the 128-year reign of the Median in Asia. After Cyrus II gained control of Ecbatana, Cyrus named himself Astyages' successor and took control of the entire empire. In inheriting the empire of Astyages, he also inherited the territorial conflicts that the Medes had had with both Lydia and the Neo-Babylonian Empire. King Croesus of Lydia tried to take advantage of the new situation by penetrating previously Median territory in Asia Minor. The Persian king, Cyrus II, or also called Cyrus the Great, conquered in 550 BC the kingdom of Media, which led to conflicts with the neighboring Lydian kingdom, as the Lydian king Croesus claimed Median territories. Cyrus intended to catch the Lydian king Croesus unprepared in battle, but at Themba Croesus had more than twice as many men as Cyrus. The Lydians marched to meet Cyrus and quickly armed all the reserves there before their allies could arrive, but they never did. Cyrus had a total of 20,000 men, which consisted of 7,000 Persians. These consisted of 2,000 archers and slingers, 5,000 elite cavalry, who may have been the Persian immortals. All but the archers and slingers are known to have carried small to large shields. His army was reinforced by 4,000 Arabs, Armenians, and Medians, which amounted to 12,600 infantrymen. There were also 300 camel cavalrymen and 4 ballistae, each holding 20 men. The Lydian king, Croesus, had an army of 42,000 men, which consisted of 6,000 Babylonians, Lydians, and Phrygians, also Cappadocians and nations of the Hellespont. These were 30,000 men, including 6,000 cavalry. There were also 12,000 Egyptians and chariots. Greek tradition portrays the Lydians as effeminate barbarians, but this image only emerged after Lydia became a Persian satrapy. In the early to middle Lydian period, and probably later, the nobility provided one as early as the 6th century BC. a militarily useless chariot force, and a feared cavalry. 2 skeletons of Lydian soldiers showed that heavy shields and helmets were used. Short sabers, war sickles, slingshots, and bows and arrows have been documented as weapons. Cyrus deployed his troops in a square formation with their flanks withdrawn. He took advantage of a hill and positioned his artillery there. The flanks were covered by cavalry on both sides, of Cyrus himself on one side and a general on the other. Cyrus also used pack camels to create a barrier in front of his archers. The smell of the camels disturbed the Lydian horses and scattered their cavalry charge while the archers fired on the Lydian forces. From the hill they had a clear shot and were able to effectively decimate and thin out the charging chariots. As Cyrus expected, the Lydian army's wings rolled inwards, like a triangle, to envelop this novel formation. A kind of star emerged. This enabled the Persian cavalry to position its wings in a star shape and fire at the enemy in a zigzag fashion from the front and rear. As the Lydian flanks swung in, gaps appeared at the hinges of the pivoting wings. The unrest was increased by the effective overhead fire of the Persian archers and mobile turrets stationed on the high ground. Finally, Cyrus gave the order to attack, and his flank units smashed into Croesus' disorganized wings. When the Lydian cavalry lost many soldiers, they had to retreat. With most of Cyrus' army intact and most of the Lydian cavalry lost, Cyrus ordered all cavalry and infantry to attack the remnants of Croesus' forces. The majority of the infantry soon surrendered, but Croesus and a small portion of the infantry withdrew and made their way to the Lydian capital of Sardis. The poor development of the Lydian siege system can easily be deduced from the Lydians' ongoing and ultimately militarily unsuccessful campaigns. On the other hand, in terms of the strength of its defenses, Sardis could compete with the largest Oriental cities and was superior to all Greek cities of its time. After the Lydians were defeated in the field, Cyrus II led a counterattack that not only repelled Croesus' armies, but also led to the conquest of Sardis and the fall of the Lydian kingdom in 546 BC. Cyrus put Pactyes in charge of collecting tribute in Lydia and left the country, but after Cyrus left, Pactyes instigated a rebellion against Cyrus. Cyrus sent the Median general Mazars to fight the rebellion, and Pactyes was captured. Mazars and, after his death, Harpagus set about destroying all the cities involved in the rebellion. The subjugation of Lydia lasted a total of around 4 years. There were numerous other revolts in the new Persian Empire. This forced Cyrus to wage wars against Bactria and the nomadic Saka in Central Asia. On the relations between Persia and Babylon between 547 and 539 BC. Nothing is known about, but it is likely that there were hostilities between the two empires for several years, leading to the War of 540 to 539 BC, and the fall of Babylon. In October 539 BC, Cyrus won a battle against the Babylonians at Opis, then conquered Sippar without a fight and finally captured the city of Babylon, where the Babylonian king Nabonidus was captured. With the capture of Babylon, Cyrus II, also known as Cyrus the Great, now controlled large parts of Asia. The entire Mede Empire as far as Bactria in the east and Lydia in the west. When Cyrus took control of the city of Babylon, he portrayed himself in propaganda as a restorer of the divine order that had been disrupted by Nabonidus, who had promoted the cult of Sin in place of Marduk, and he also presented himself as a restorer of the Neo-Assyrian legacy empire by comparing himself to the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal. The Hebrew Bible also unreservedly praises Cyrus for his actions in the conquest of Babylon and describes him as Yahweh's anointed one. He is credited with freeing the people of Judah from their exile and authorizing the reconstruction of much of Jerusalem, including the Second Temple. In his last campaign, behind the Caucasus against the Scythians, Cyrus overestimated himself and lost his head in the battle. In 530 BC, Cyrus the Great died, probably during a military expedition against the Kushite in Central Asia. He was succeeded by his eldest son Cambyses II, while his younger son Bardia received a large territory in Central Asia. Until 525 BC, Cambyses had successfully subdued Phoenicia and Cyprus and was preparing to invade Egypt with the newly created Persian fleet. According to legend, Cambyses II conquered Pelusium using a clever strategy. The Egyptians considered certain animals, especially cats, to be sacred. They had a cat goddess named Bastet and would not harm them under any circumstances. Cambyses had his men carry the holy animals in front of him to attack. The Egyptians did not dare to fire their arrows for fear of injuring the animals, and so Pelusium was successfully stormed. This would be an early form of psychological warfare. Pharaoh Amasis II had died in 526 BC and was succeeded by Psamtik III, which led to key Egyptian allies defecting to the Persians. Psamtik positioned his army at Pelusium in the Nile Delta. He was defeated by the Persians at the Battle of Pelusium before escaping to Memphis, where the Persians defeated and captured him. After a failed attempt at rebellion, Psamtik III immediately committed suicide. When Herodotus came to visit, the surrounding fields were littered with the bones of the fighters. He noted that the skulls of the Egyptians differed from those of the Persians in their greater hardness, a fact which he believed was confirmed by the mummies and which he attributed to the fact that the Egyptians shaved their heads from infancy and the Persians they covered with folds of cloth or linen. Darius I comes from another branch of the Achaemenid family. By Cambyses II, Darius was made his personal lancer. Darius accompanied him in this capacity in 522 BC on his campaign against Egypt. There Cambyses is said to have learned that his brother Bardia had risen against him in the Persian heartland and the capital Ecbatana. Cambyses doubted his brother's treachery and had reason to suspect his murder. He set out immediately to put down the rebellion, but died during the retreat, probably in an accident. Herodotus also hints at the possibility of an assassination attempt. Cambyses II died under mysterious circumstances in Syria on his way from Egypt to Persia. Bardia II, son of Cyrus II, and thus the younger brother of Cambyses II, became king of Persia. But before his Egyptian campaign in 525 BC, murdered. The secrecy was completely successful, so that the magician and high priest Galmada, Herodotus describes a magical resemblance between the two, was able to pose as Bardia during Cambyses' absence, deceive the court and have himself crowned king. The second son of Cyrus was murdered by a Marduk priest. In modern research, however, it is considered quite possible that the alleged Galmada was actually Bardia, who was not murdered. Thus, the depiction of Darius would only have been a justification for a usurpation. To avenge Cambyses, Darius returned to Persia and was able to enlist 6 childhood friends to overthrow the false Bardia, a certain Galmada. He had to fight a total of 19 battles and defeat 9 rebellious lying kings in order to finally become ruler of the entire Persian Empire. Some Iranians are said to be celebrating the festival of magician killing today on September 29th. Darius the Great, he was from 522 BC. Third great king of the Persian Achaemenid Empire. At the same time in Persis, the native land of the Persians, a man arose who also claimed to be Bardia. There was renewed unrest in Elam. Serious unrest and fighting also occurred in Lydia, Parthia, Assyria, Egypt, among the Satyrids and again in Babylonia. Towards the end of 522 BC, almost the entire Persian Empire was in turmoil. However, Darius could rely on a loyal military force led by close confidants, so that, according to him, within a year the uprisings were put down one after the other. Asina was the first rebel leader who, shortly after the overthrow, took the lead in an uprising of the Elamites and proclaimed himself king of Elam. He was killed by Darius personally. At about the same time, Nidintabel claimed to be the alleged son of Nabonidus in Babylon and proclaimed himself king under the name Nebuchadnezzar III. He was captured and executed by Darius in September 522 BC. The first uprisings in Babylon followed, which, apart from a short interruption, lasted until December 521 BC. Chr. In May 521 BC, Nebuchadnezzar IV proclaimed himself the new king of Babylon and was killed almost 7 months later by Darius, like Nebuchadnezzar III before him. Other so-called lying kings followed, all of whom were beaten, staked, or crucified. Darius I, alongside the empire's founder Cyrus the Great, is considered the most important king of the old Persian Empire. One of his achievements was the renewal of the imperial structures. His administrative reforms were considered exemplary long after the end of the Achaemenid Empire. Perhaps they even influenced the organization of the Roman Empire. He also promoted the arts, especially architecture. The founding of Persepolis and the construction activity in other residential cities, especially in Susa, bear witness to this. In the history of the Achaemenid Empire, the reign of Darius represents the phase of greatest expansion of the empire. After the end of 521 BC, when peace was restored in the empire, Darius I devoted himself primarily to the internal renewal of the empire, especially in order to exclude a situation like the one he had just endured in the future. The empire was divided into uniform provinces, so-called satrapies, which were hardly based on the previously incorporated empires, but were primarily tailored to the individual peoples. In addition, numerous other reforms were carried out in administration, economy, society, and the military. With the campaign of 513 BC, the Persians came into closer contact with the Greeks for the first time since Cyrus' Asia Minor campaign against the Lydians. Although many areas of the eastern Mediterranean populated by Greeks were under Persian rule, the Persians had very little interest in this country. When, in the course of the subjugation of Thrace, Macedonia also became a vassal of Persia, the independent Greeks believed that they would soon come into the gaze of the great king themselves. Athens tried to prevent this by concluding an alliance with the Persian Empire in 506 BC. On the Persian side, this was understood as formal submission. The northern border of the empire continued to be threatened by the Sakin. After several large-scale military actions in Central Asia failed to produce a decision, a campaign was launched against the Scythians living on the Black Sea coast, which perhaps had the aim of stabbing the Central Asian Sacs in the back. Although the Scythian War was a failure, a new satrapy Thrace was won in Europe and the border of the empire was pushed forward to the Danube. This brought the empire into direct proximity with the European Greeks. In particular, the Persian advances in the Mediterranean and the Aegean and the subjugation of Macedonia may have caused concern in Greece. An alliance offer from Athens in 507 BC was seen by the Persians as a formal subjugation of the city-state. In 499 BC, finally, a rebellion broke out in the Greek areas of Asia Minor against Persian rule. Greek rebels took over in 498 BC, the former territories of Lydia and Sardis, and burned the city. This Ionian revolt, which temporarily extended to Cyprus and also caused the secession of Thrace, was ended in 494 BC. It was crushed and the leading city, Miletus, was destroyed. In the following years there were two Persian punitive expeditions in the Aegean region, the beginning of the so-called Persian Wars. 492 BC Thrace was conquered again. 490 BC, the city of Eretria, which was allied with Athens, was captured and destroyed. A Persian army eventually landed in Attica with the intention of taking Athens. However, this was thwarted by the Battle of Marathon, whereby the Persian venture can be seen as a punitive expedition rather than a real invasion, and subsequent Athenian military operations. According to Greek sources, in 486 BC, a new campaign against Greece was planned, but this did not take place due to an uprising in Egypt and the death of Darius. after the first Persian invasion of Greece failed. The successor of Darius, Xerxes I, 486 to 465 BC, initially neglected Greece's western border, but then decided to invade Greece in 481 BC to undertake another campaign. After initial successes, Athens, which had been evaluated by its residents, was taken. The Acropolis was destroyed as an act of revenge for sanctuaries destroyed in Sardis. This venture also failed in the battles of Salamis, 480 BC, and Platae, 479 BC. The Greeks, led by the Athenians, now went on the offensive themselves and liberated almost all Greek cities in the empire in the following decades, i.e. especially on the west coast of Asia Minor, formerly Lydia, from Persian rule. Sparta, until then the leading Greek power in the Persian War, was not interested in operations in Asia Minor, so that Athens now had the sole leadership role in the fight against the Persians. Athens finally organized a real alliance system, which soon turned into an instrument for preserving Athenian hegemony, the so-called Athenian Naval League. The Persians themselves remained defensive and limited themselves to trying to keep the Greeks out of the empire's territory. Not until 449 BC. A peace was concluded with Athens, the so-called Peace of Callias.